My ship went down on the 7th day of the dry season, and I have spent the rest of my life trying to explain what I found out there. I am told that men my age are supposed to make peace with the things they cannot prove. I am told that the war is over and that the dead are tallied and that the colony charts have all been redrawn, and that whatever I think I saw on the salt flats of Sahel IV is a private matter, suitable for the chaplain or the bottle, but not for the record. I have written it down anyway. I am not writing it for the record. I am writing it because there was a boy, and I do not want to be the last man alive who remembers him. My name is Karim Vasquez. I was a survey pilot for the Terran Frontier Office, 2nd grade, 18 years into the Stillness War, and I had no business being that deep into Asteros country. My orders were to skim the upper troposphere and map the new fault lines that the bombardment had opened along the southern continent. I had a single-seat reconnaissance hull, an old Strix glass, the kind they used to call a coffin with a window, because the canopy was wider than the cockpit, and the armor plating was thinner than the windscreen. I had 6 days of rations, a sidearm I had never fired in anger, and a head full of grievances I had been carrying since my brother died at the Battle of Coronet Belt. I will tell you about my brother later, or I will not. It depends on whether my hand holds out. I should say, before I go any further, that I had been on the long side of the war by the time I came down on Sahel IV. I had been 16 years in uniform. I had buried a brother, a mother, 2 cousins, and the entire grade I went through flight school with except for one woman who had taken a desk job in Geneva and never spoken to me again because I reminded her of the people we had lost. I had stopped sleeping well at about the 8-year mark, and I had stopped sleeping much at all at 12. And the survey pilot work had been a charity posting given to me by a major who had served with my father in the old colonial wars and who thought, kindly and wrongly, that lonely work in the high atmosphere would settle me. It did not settle me. It only put me in places where there was nothing to distract me from the things I had been carrying. A man with too much to remember should not be sent to a quiet sky. I would tell that to anyone in command who would listen, if I were still close enough to command to be listened to, which I am not. The Asteros caught me on the 7th day. I do not know how. We had been told their atmospheric sensors did not function below the cloud deck, and that was a lie the high command kept telling us so that we would keep volunteering for low passes. The first I knew of it was a pulse in the air, a low geometric chime that came up through the hull and into my teeth, and then my instruments fell quiet. Not crashed. Quiet. The way a room goes quiet when someone has stopped breathing. My engine kept running for another 40 seconds out of sheer mechanical loyalty, and then it remembered it was made of metal, and the Asteros owned all the metal in the world, and it stopped too. I came down on the salt flats. There is no kind way to describe what that crash did to my body. I remember tasting copper. I remember the canopy folding in like a paper cup. I remember the sun, very white, very far away, and the sound of my own voice saying a woman's name that I had not said out loud in 11 years. I do not write her name here. She is none of your business. When I came back to myself, I was lying half out of the wreckage with my left leg pinned and a desert the color of bleached bone running flat to every horizon. The salt was so white it hurt to look at. The sky above it was the color of weak tea. There was no wind. There was no sound, and I mean no sound, not insects, not wind on the wreckage, not the cooling tick of the engine. The Asteros chime had stopped, but in its place there was a stillness so complete that I could hear the blood moving behind my own eyes. I worked my leg free over the course of about 2 hours. I'm not going to pretend I was brave about it. I cried twice. I prayed once badly, the way a man prays when he has not done it in a long time and has forgotten where the words go. When I was finally upright, leaning against the wing stub, I took stock. My survival kit was intact. My water was rationed to maybe 9 days if I was careful. My distress beacon was a slag of melted plastic. My sidearm was clean. The continent shelf I had been mapping was, by my best guess, 400 kilometers of dead salt in every direction, and the nearest friendly outpost was on the other side of the Asteros-held territory. I had just been shot down inside. I sat back down. I laughed once. It was not a good laugh. Then I started building shade out of the canopy panels, because a man who has decided to die does not bother with shade, and I had not decided yet. That was the first day. The boy came on the second day, around what I judged to be the third hour after the high sun. I did not see him approach. The flats were so empty that anything moving on them should have been visible from kilometers away, and the haze should have made a moving figure shimmer and double like a stone skipping on water. But I looked up from rebandaging my leg, and he was simply there, about 10 meters from my wing, standing very still and watching me. He was small, maybe 9 or 10 standard years by his build, though his face had the calm of something much older. He was wearing what looked at first like an Imperial flight cadet's dress uniform, the old kind, pale gold with a high collar, except the cut was wrong in ways I could not place, and the fabric did not move the way fabric is supposed to move in dry air. His hair was the color of old wheat. His eyes were very dark and very still. I said hello. He said, please, draw me a soldier. I will tell you what I thought first because I owe you the truth. I thought he was a hallucination. Heat stroke, dehydration, head injury, take your pick. I had read the same field manuals you have. The mind under stress will manufacture company. It is not even rare. So I said nothing for a long moment, and I watched him, and I waited for him to flicker or dissolve or do whatever a hallucination does when you stop believing in it. He did not. He stood there. He waited. He was patient in the way a stone is patient. I do not have anything to draw with, I said finally. You have a stylus, he said, in your left chest pocket, behind your identification card. I touched the pocket. The stylus was there. I had not used it in months. I did not remember telling him about it. I drew a soldier on the back of my ration card, a sloppy figure with a rifle and a helmet too big for his head. I held it up. The boy studied it. He shook his head gently without judgment. That is not a soldier, he said. That is a man pretending to be a soldier. Please, draw me a real one. I drew another. Better this time. A trooper in full kit, the way I remembered my brother looking the last time I saw him, on the platform at Coronet Station with the helmet under one arm and that ridiculous grin he had. The boy looked at it for a long time. Then he said very softly, yes, that one, thank you. He folded the ration card and put it into a pocket of his uniform that I could not quite see clearly, and he sat down in the salt across from me, and he did not move for a while. I would like to tell you that I asked him sensible questions. Where did you come from? How did you get here? Are there other survivors? Are you human? I did not ask any of these things. I think I was afraid that if I asked the wrong question he would vanish, and I was not yet ready to be alone again, so I asked him his name. I do not have a name in your language, he said. I had one where I came from, but it is a long word and it would tire your mouth. You may call me what you like. I thought about it. I thought about my brother. I thought about not nomming him at all, because nomming a thing is how you start to lose it. In the end I said, I will call you the prince, because of the uniform. He smiled at that. It was the first time I saw him smile. It was a small, grave, courteous smile, and it made him look not younger but older, the way certain very old men look when they remember a kindness. The prince, he said, yes, I have been called that before. We sat together as the high sun crawled across the white sky. He did not eat any of my rations when I offered. He did not drink any of my water. He did not seem to be uncomfortable in the heat, though I was already feeling the salt crack open the skin around my eyes. I watched him out of the corner of my eye for a long time, the way a man watches a wild animal that has come up close to his fire and has not decided yet whether it is going to bite him. He did not move much. When he did move, his movements were small and exact, the way a much older man moves when he has learned not to waste anything. He turned his head to follow a shadow once. He folded his small hands in his lap. He did not blink as often as a boy should blink. None of it was alarming exactly. All of it was wrong by a degree so small that you would not have noticed it if you had not been looking. And I was looking, because I had nothing else to do, and because the alternative was thinking about the 400 kilometers of salt between me and anywhere alive. After a while, when I had decided that whether he was real or not he was at least company, I asked him where he came from. He pointed up. I waited. He did not elaborate. From orbit, I said. From a ship, from very far, he said. From a small place. I left it because I had a quarrel with a flower, which is a foolish reason to leave anywhere, and now I have traveled through many places and I have come here where you are, and I am glad I came. I did not know what to do with that. I let it sit. I have learned in the years since that there are some things a man does not need to understand in the moment, and the prince was one of them. He spoke that way the whole time I knew him. Riddles that were not riddles. Statements that sounded simple and that I would think about for the next 30 years. That night the Asteros came for me. I should explain about the Asteros in case you have only ever read the propaganda. They were not monsters. That is the first thing the propaganda gets wrong. They were beings, and they had their own purposes, and their purposes were not ours, and that was the whole of the problem. We had found them, or they had found us, 62 years before I came down on Sahel IV, when our first long-range probe pinged something in the upper atmosphere of a gas giant out beyond the Hyades stream, and the something pinged back. They lived in the cores of gas giants. They were silicate-shelled, slow-bodied, immensely long-lived, and they thought in geometric harmonies that our mathematicians spent 2 decades trying to map and never quite finished mapping. They sang to each other across light years on bands we could barely detect, and what they sang was, as near as we could ever translate it, a kind of music that was also a kind of law. The war started because we landed on a world they had not formally claimed but had been singing about for 9,000 years, and we built a refinery on it, and the refinery broke a harmonic they had been holding since before our species came down out of the trees. They asked us to leave. We did not understand that they were asking. By the time we understood, they had decided we were a discordance, and the Asteros do not negotiate with discordances. They resolve them. 18 years in, we had lost 41 colony worlds, 160 million people, and most of our outer fleet. We had killed perhaps 8 of them total in 18 years. Each Asteros that died took 100,000 of us with it, on average, and the survivors were always the wrong survivors. The ones who had been too far from the front, the ones who had been hiding, the ones who, like me, had been mapping fault lines from the troposphere because they were not steady enough for combat duty anymore. We had tried negotiation 4 times. The first 3 attempts came back as our envoys had gone in, except that the envoys were no longer breathing, and there were small geometric adjustments to the inside of their skulls that the medical examiners refused to describe in writing. The 4th attempt did not come back at all. After that, the High Command stopped trying. They settled into the long shape of the war and made their peace with the casualty tables, and they built more ships, and they sent men like my brother into the coronet belt to be vapor, and they sent men like me up into the troposphere to draw lines on maps that nobody would ever read. There was an idea in those years that the war could be outlasted, that the Asteros were ancient and would tire, that if we held the line long enough they would lose interest, the way an old man loses interest in an argument he has been winning for too long. It was a fantasy. The Asteros do not tire. They do not lose interest. They resolve discordances, and a discordance to them is not an opponent. It is a wrong note that has to be either dissolved or muted, and they were patient enough to muted us a colony at a time until the song was clean again. I did not know any of this on the 2nd night on Sahel IV. I knew most of it later. At the time I knew only that there was a chime in the air, and that a small boy was sitting across from me, and that my sidearm was useless, and I knew that I was very tired and that I did not want to die that night, even though I had not particularly wanted to live for some years before it. When they came for me on the second night, I heard them first. The chime in the air. The low geometric harmony that meant a survey form was being held over the salt flats, somewhere within a few kilometers of my position. The prince looked up at the sound, and his face did something complicated that I did not understand at the time. "They have been here for a long time," he said quietly. "Longer than your people know. Are they coming for me?" "They are coming for the discordants," he said. "You are the discordants, so yes." I drew my sidearm. It was a stupid gesture, and I knew it was stupid even while I was doing it. You do not shoot an Asteros with a sidearm. You do not shoot an Asteros with a battery of fleet-grade plasma cannons, mostly. You hold position and you pray they get bored, which they almost never do. The prince put his hand on my wrist. His hand was very cold. Not cool. Cold, like a piece of metal that has been left out in winter. "Put it away," he said. "It will not help, but I will tell you something that might." "Tell me." "They cannot bear to listen to a man who is remembering," he said. I waited. He did not say more. "That is not an answer," I said finally. "That is a sentence." "It is the answer," he said. "I have watched them for a long time, and I have watched your people for a shorter time, and I have noticed it. When a man is in front of them and the man is afraid, they resolve him quickly. They take him apart and they fold him into their harmony, and that is the end of him. But when a man is remembering, really remembering, not thinking about himself, but holding another person in his mind, the harmony breaks. The Asteros stop. They cannot proceed. It is, to them, a wrongness so deep that they have to retune themselves before they can move forward. It buys time. Sometimes it buys a great deal of time. You have seen this work." "Twice," he said. "Both men died anyway, but they died later, and they died having said something they wanted to say." I sat with that. The chime in the air was growing closer. I could feel it now in the salt under my hands, a vibration so slow it was almost a pulse. I had perhaps 3 or 4 minutes before the survey form crested whatever low ridge it was rising behind. "Who do I remember?" I said. The prince looked at me with those very dark, very still eyes. "You know who," he said. I remembered my brother. I will not write down everything I remembered, because most of it is not yours, and because some of it I have not said out loud to any other living person, and I am not going to start now. But I remembered Coronet Station. I remembered him on the platform with the helmet under one arm. I remembered the grin. I remembered the way he had clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Karim, you're going to be a tremendous old man one day. Do me a favor and live to find out." And how I had laughed at him because he was the one who was going off to fight, and I was the one who was going off to draw lines on maps. And how 3 weeks later he was vapor in the Coronet Belt along with 11,000 other men. And how I had not cried for him, not properly, not once in 11 years. Because I had been waiting for the war to end, so I could afford to. I remembered him, hard, with everything I had. While the chime climbed up through the salt and the survey form crested the ridge and the air around me started to bend in geometric shapes that my eyes could not quite resolve. I do not have good words for what an Asteros survey form looks like. The sensors will probably trim what I have anyway. It was perhaps 30 meters across, and it floated about 4 meters off the salt. It was the color of certain rocks I have seen on cold worlds, a gray that is also a green that is also nothing at all. It had no face. It had what I can only call attention, and the attention swept the wreckage of my Strix and settled on me, and the chime in the air sharpened into something specific. The way a song sharpens when a note becomes a word. The prince stood up beside me. He was a very small figure beside the survey form, and he did not look afraid. I held my brother in my mind. I held the platform. I held the grin. I held the 11 years of not crying. I held the woman whose name I had said in the crash and have not said since. I held my mother's kitchen in the colony on Tanais where I grew up. I held everyone I had ever lost or might lose, and I pulled them up into the front of my mind like a man pulling buckets out of a well, hand over hand, as fast as I could move. The Asteros stopped. I do not mean it paused. I mean the geometry around it went wrong. The shapes that had been bending in the air bent further, then broke, then reformed in patterns that I could see were not patterns the thing had intended. The chime, which had been a single clean note, fractured. It became 3 notes, then 9, then a kind of harmonic shudder. The survey form drifted backwards perhaps half a meter. The attention that had been on me wavered, like a man who has been hit in the side of the head and is trying to remember what he was doing. The prince said very softly, "Keep going." I kept going. I remembered things I had not remembered in years. I remembered my father teaching me to fix a generator in the rain when I was 8. I remembered the smell of pine resin in the foothills above our colony. I remembered the first girl I ever kissed and how badly I did it and how kindly she had pretended otherwise. I remembered my brother teaching me to throw a knife when our parents weren't looking. I pulled it all up and I held it in front of me like a shield, except I knew it wasn't a shield. It was a hand held out to the dead, and the dead were there with me, all at once, crowding the wreckage of my ship. The survey form retuned itself. I felt the moment it happened. The fractured chime resolved back into a single note, harder than before. The geometry firmed. The attention came back, and it was angrier. Though anger is the wrong word for what an Asteros feels, it was more precise, more focused. The way a man becomes more focused when an obstacle has been identified and assigned a corrective priority. I lost my grip on the memories. They scattered. I felt them go. The salt under my hands started to vibrate hard enough to hurt. The prince stepped forward between me and the survey form, and he raised one small hand, and he sang. I do not have words for what he sang. It was not in any human language. It was not in the Asteros harmonic either, though it borrowed from it. It was something older than both of us, a thread of melody so simple and so wrong that the survey form physically recoiled. The chime in the air shattered. The geometry collapsed inward. The 30-meter survey form, which had killed entire battalions and ended entire towns, retreated. It rose and it turned, and it went back over the ridge it had come from, and the salt flats went still again. The prince lowered his hand. He looked tired, in the way that a candle looks tired in the last hour of its burning. "That will not work twice," he said. "What did you do?" "I reminded them of something they would prefer to forget," he said. "I am not the only thing in the universe that has wandered far from home. They came from somewhere too once. They do not like to be reminded." I stared at him. There were 100 questions I should have asked then. I asked the wrong one. "What are you?" I said. He smiled the small grave smile again. "I am a boy," he said. "I am a boy who has been to many places, and I have come here and I am with you. Is that not enough?" "No." "Then I am sorry," he said, "because it is all the answer I have for you." I slept that night badly. The prince did not sleep. When I woke before dawn, he was sitting in the same place he had been sitting at sunset, watching the horizon as still as the wreckage. I do not know if he ever slept. I never saw him do it. The next 4 days we walked. He told me very simply that there was a place I could go, a place on the salt flats where the Asteros harmonics did not reach, a small dead spot in their pattern, and that if I could reach it I could activate a relay he claimed had been left there a long time ago by something that was neither Terran nor Asteros. I asked him whether it would still work. He said he did not know. I asked him how far it was. He said it was about 110 kilometers, in the direction the prevailing wind would have come from if there had been a prevailing wind. I asked him why he had not used it himself to leave. He looked at me for a long time, and then he said, "I have not finished what I came here to do." We walked. My leg was bad. My water was worse. I had stripped what I could from the Strix, the canopy panels for shade, the emergency strip foil for night warmth, the medical kit, the dry rations. I rigged a travois out of the wing stub and dragged it behind me. The prince walked beside me. He did not seem to tire. He did not seem to grow thirsty. Sometimes he would sing under his breath in his own language, and the salt around us would shimmer in patterns that I could not quite see, and I came to understand, slowly, that he was keeping the Asteros from finding us. He was thinning the harmony in our wake, the way a man scuffs his footprints behind him in soft ground. The salt flats are difficult to describe to anyone who has not walked them. They are not a desert in the way that the old Earth deserts were deserts. There is no sand. There is no dune. The salt is hard, fused by 10,000 years of heat into something between rock and glass, and it cracks under boots with a sound like dry bone. The light coming off it goes through a man's eyes the way an interrogator's lamp goes through a man's eyes. There is no escape from it, no shade you can build that the glare does not get under. I had to walk with my hood down over my brow and my eyes nearly closed, judging the ground by the sound of my own footsteps and the feel of the travois behind me. The prince walked beside me with his face uncovered. The glare did not seem to touch him. I asked him once whether the light hurt his eyes. He said, "I have walked through brighter places. This is a soft light. You will see brighter ones in your life if you are fortunate." I did not ask him what he meant. I had stopped asking him what he meant on most things by the second day. He answered what he wanted to answer, and the rest he let lie. We talked as we walked. I learned almost nothing concrete about him. He had been to many worlds. He had quarreled with a flower once, and the quarrel was the great sorrow of his existence, and he did not say more about it. He had met, on his travels, a man who counted stars and called them his own, and a man who lit lamps for nobody, and a man who drank because he was ashamed and was ashamed because he drank. He spoke of them the way a man speaks of old companions. The star counter, he said, had lived on a small asteroid and kept ledgers, and the ledgers said that every star within his sight was his property, and the prince had asked him what good a star was to a man who owned it, and the man had said that it was good for being his, and the prince had walked away from that asteroid without quite understanding what he had been told. The lamplighter, he said, had lived on a smaller asteroid still, and lit a single lamp every evening and put it out every morning, and the rotation of his asteroid had become so fast that he had no rest between the lighting and the putting out, and the prince had stayed with him for a day and helped him, and had been sad to leave him. The drinker had lived alone on a piece of rock the size of a barn, and had spoken of his shame in a voice the prince said was the saddest he had ever heard. I never knew whether they were real, in the sense I understand realness, or whether they were stories he carried with him to give shape to the long emptiness between worlds. It did not matter. After a while it stopped mattering. I think now that he was telling me about the people he had not been able to save, and that the telling of them was a kind of inventory he kept, the way an old soldier keeps the names of the men in his old squad pinned above his desk. He told me once, on the second night of the walk, about a man he had met on a world I will not try to spell. The man, he said, had been the last living person on a station that had been overrun by the Asteros. The man had hidden for 3 weeks in a maintenance crawl space with no light and very little water, and the prince had found him there, and had sat with him through his last hours, and the man had asked the prince to remember his name, and the name of his wife and the names of his 3 children, and the prince had remembered them, and had carried them with him ever since. And he said the names to me then very softly into the salt. I do not write them here. They were not mine to write. I only say that he said them, and that when he said them the wind, which had not blown in 4 days, came up briefly and went around us in a small circle and then went still again, and the prince looked at me and said, "That was them," saying, "Thank you. They are very patient, the dead. They wait a long time to be remembered." After he said that I walked for an hour without speaking. I was thinking about my brother. I was thinking about whether anyone had said his name out loud in the 11 years since Coronet Belt, and I could not be sure they had, and the thought of it was something I had to walk through the way a man walks through cold water. I told him about my brother. I told him about Coronet Belt. I told him about my mother, who had refused to be evacuated when the Asteros came for Tanais, and who had died, as near as the casualty service could ever tell us, in her own kitchen with the kettle on. I told him about the woman whose name I had said in the crash. I told him things I had not told anyone in 11 years, and I told him things I had not even told myself. I told him about the day my brother and I had stolen a transport scooter from our father's depot when I was 12 and he was 15, and how we had taken it out into the foothills above Tanais and run it dry of fuel and had to walk back, and how our father, when he found out, had not punished us but had sat us down at the kitchen table and made us promise, both of us, that we would always come back together from wherever we went. I told the prince that my brother had not come back from Coronet Belt, and that I had been keeping the promise alone for 11 years, and that I had thought, when I came down on the salt, that I was finally going to be allowed to stop keeping it. I did not know I was going to say any of that. The salt under my boots cracked and the prince walked beside me, and I said it all anyway. He listened. He listened the way nobody had ever listened to me before. He did not interrupt. He did not offer comfort. He did not tell me what I should feel. He absorbed it the way the salt absorbed my footsteps, without comment, without resistance, but completely. When I had stopped talking, after maybe an hour, he said one thing only. He said, "Your brother would be proud of the old man you are becoming." I did not answer him. I could not. I walked for another 2 hours in silence with the prince beside me, and somewhere in those 2 hours, without any particular ceremony, I started to forgive myself for being the one who had lived. On the 3rd day, the Asteros came for us again. This time it was not a survey form. This time it was a resolver, and a resolver is a different proposition. A resolver is what they send when they have decided that the discordance is significant. It does not float. It walks. It is bipedal, or at least it suggests bipedalism the way a sculpture might suggest the idea of a man without committing to one, and it is taller than a survey form and slower and immeasurably more dangerous. The harmony around a resolver is so dense that human pilots inside it report their instruments rewriting themselves to display music notation instead of altitude. I saw it coming from a long way off. There was nowhere to hide. The flats were flat. I dropped the travois and I drew my sidearm again, knowing how stupid it was, and the prince put his small cold hand on my wrist again and said, "Not yet." "How do we run from that?" "We do not run from that," he said. "We walk and we remember." So we walked, and I remembered. I remembered my brother. I remembered my mother's kitchen. I remembered Tanais in the rain. I held them all in my head while the resolver closed the distance behind us, kilometre by kilometre, and the chime in the air rose to a sound I could feel in my marrow. The resolver took the better part of a day to catch us. That was the strangest part. It was faster than us, much faster. Its long, impossible stride covered ground at perhaps 3 times my pace, but it did not hurry. It paced us. It came on at the speed of a man taking an evening walk, and it stayed about 400 meters behind us, and the chime in the air rose by half tones, very slowly, the way a man closes a door slowly when he wants the person inside the room to understand that the door is closing, and that there is no rush about it because there is nowhere left to go. I have thought about that packing a great deal in the years since. I do not think the resolver was being cruel. The Asteros do not, as far as I can tell, do cruelty in the way we do. Cruelty requires a sense that the other party deserves dignity, and the Asteros did not see us as parties at all. We were simply a noise that had to be resolved. I think the resolver was being thorough. It had identified a discordance that had survived 2 attempted resolutions, and it was approaching with the patience of a precise instrument approaching a precise wrongness, and the patience was 1,000 times worse than haste would have been. Haste I could have understood. Haste would have meant fear. There was no fear behind us. There was a long, slow arithmetic, and the arithmetic was working out my last hours 1 geometric step at a time. The prince walked beside me. He was singing again, very softly, the wrong old song. I noticed as the day wore on that the song was changing. It had been thin and almost tuneless at first, the kind of melody a man hums when he is trying not to think about something. By the afternoon it had thickened. It had a structure now. He was building it as we walked, the way a stonemason builds a wall in a hurry, course by course, with whatever stones come to hand. I asked him once what he was building. He did not stop singing to answer. He smiled the small, grave smile through the singing, and he kept walking, and the chime behind us climbed another half-tone. The resolver caught us at sundown on the third day. It stopped about 40 meters behind us, and the chime in the air sharpened, and I felt the geometry start to bend. The prince turned around. He let go of my wrist. He walked back alone toward the resolver. I shouted at him. I do not remember exactly what. I think I told him to come back. I think I told him not to be a fool. I think I called him by his name, which was the prince, which was not really his name. He did not turn around. He stopped about 10 meters in front of the resolver, and he raised both hands, and he sang. What he sang this time was not the wrong old song. It was something else. It was something that took me a long time afterwards to understand, and even now I am not sure I have it right. It was a memory. He was singing a memory at the resolver, not his own memory, mine. He was singing my brother on the platform at Coronet Station, with the helmet under one arm and the grin and the ridiculous, impossible parting line, and he was singing it in a harmonic the resolver could understand, the way a translator turns a foreign poem into a language that almost catches the original. The resolver stopped, then it shook, then it broke. I'm not going to pretend I understood what happened. The geometry around it collapsed inward, and the silicate shell, that gray-green nothing color, cracked along seams I had not been able to see before, and a sound came out of it that was not a sound. It was a kind of grief. I have to use that word because I have no other. It was the grief of a thing that has been forced, against its nature, to hear what it has been doing for 62 years. The resolver folded down onto the salt. It did not die the way a man dies. It went still. The chime went out of it. The harmony around it dispersed. It became, in a few seconds, a heap of gray-green rock about the height of a man, and around the rock the salt was cooling and recrystallizing into patterns that looked briefly like the face of my brother before they faded. The prince was on his knees. I ran to him. My leg was bad and I almost fell, but I got to him, and I went down beside him in the salt. He looked very small. That was a stupid thing to do, I said, because I am the kind of man who says stupid things in important moments. It was not stupid, he said. It was a thing I came here to do. You said the trick would not work twice. It did not work twice, he said. It worked once and then I worked. There is a difference. I did not understand him then. I have come to understand him since. He was dying, I could see it. There was no blood because he had never had any blood as far as I could tell, but the thing he was made of was dimming. His pale gold uniform was going gray. His eyes, which had been so dark and so still, were softening, the way a lamp softens when the wick burns down. His small cold hand reached out and took mine. You will reach the relay, he said. You will go home. You will be a tremendous old man one day. Do me a favor and live to find out. I started to cry. I had not cried for my brother in 11 years, and I had not expected to start now, and I did not stop for a long time. The prince waited. He was patient in the way a stone is patient, until he was not a stone anymore. I cried in the way a man cries when the well has finally opened, ugly and without dignity, salt running into salt, my whole body shaking with 11 years of held water coming up at once. The prince did not look away. He did not pat my shoulder or murmur a comfort. He simply held my hand and let me do it, and I understood, somewhere underneath the crying, that he had done this before on other worlds beside other men. He knew the shape of it. He waited for the shape to finish. When I could speak again, I said, I do not know your name. You named me, he said. That is not your name. That is a thing I called you because I was afraid to be alone. It is the name I have now, he said. Names are like that. You start with the one you are born to, and you take on others as you go, and at the end the one that fits is the one a friend gave you in a hard hour. I am content with it. I would like to be the prince, if you do not mind, until the end. I do not mind. Then that is settled, he said. And he closed his eyes for a moment, the way a man closes his eyes to listen to a piece of music he likes, and then he opened them again. Tell them about me, he said finally. Not the war part. Tell them that there was a small place I came from, and I had a flower there, and I quarreled with her, and that was foolish, because the flower was mine, and you cannot have a quarrel with a thing that is yours. You can only have a quarrel with yourself. Tell them I went home. Tell them that going home is always possible if you remember the way. I will tell them. Tell them, he said very quietly, that the Asteros are not monsters. They are only a music that has gone on too long without anyone to remember what it was for. Someone has to remind them. It does not have to be a war. It can be a song. Tell your people that if they will listen. They will not listen, I said. He smiled the small grave smile. Then tell the ones who will. I held his hand. The gray came up into his hair and then into his face. He did not seem to be in pain. He looked at the very end like a boy who had been traveling for a long time and was finally arriving somewhere he wanted to go. I wanted to say something worthy of the moment. I wanted to thank him, or to bless him, or to say goodbye in a way that would carry. I could not find any of the words. In the end I said the only thing I had left, which was, I will not forget you. He looked at me with the last of his dark, still eyes, and he said, I know. That is why I came to you. There were a great many men I could have gone to on this salt. I chose the one who could carry it. And then he said the last thing. He said the last thing. He said it so softly that I almost did not hear it. He said, I am going home now. Then he was not there. I want to be clear about this. He did not dissolve. He did not vanish in a flash. He did not turn into light. He was there, and then there was a small absence in the salt where he had been, and the absence had the shape of a boy in a pale gold uniform. And then the wind came up, the first wind I had felt in 4 days, and the absence was a place where the salt had been smoothed. And then it was nothing, and I was alone on the flats with a heap of gray-green rock behind me, and 100 kilometers of dead white salt in front of me, and my brother's name in my mouth for the first time in 11 years. I walked the rest of the way to the relay. It took 6 more days. My water gave out on the 5th day. My rations gave out on the 4th. My leg, by the end, was a thing I dragged behind me rather than a thing I used. I do not remember most of those days clearly. I remember the salt. I remember the sun. I remember talking out loud to the prince and to my brother and to my mother, and to the woman whose name I had said in the crash, all of them at once, because I had stopped being able to tell which of them was which, and it did not seem to matter, because all of them were listening. The relay was where the prince had said it would be. It was buried under a half-meter of salt at the base of a low rise, and the housing on it was older than any technology I had ever seen, and when I cleared it off and touched the activation plate it worked. I do not know who built it. I do not know how long it had been waiting. I sent the distress code on every frequency I knew, and then I sat down beside it in the salt, and I waited to die or to be found, whichever came first. A Terran cruiser picked up the signal 40 hours later. They sent a shuttle. The shuttle commander was a woman about my age, with hard eyes and a voice that had been polished smooth by giving bad news for years. She got me into the medical bay, and they put fluids into me, and they set the leg, and they asked me, very gently, what had happened. I told them my ship had gone down. I told them I had walked. I told them I did not know how I had survived. They wrote it up that way, and they gave me a medal that I did not deserve and a discharge that I did, and they sent me home. I did not tell them about the prince. I did not tell them for 2 reasons. The first was that I did not think they would believe me, and I was tired, and I did not want to spend the last good years of my service in a psychiatric review. The second was that he had asked me to tell the ones who would listen, and the high command was not the ones who would listen. The high command was the ones who had given us 62 years of war and 160 million dead, and a strategy that consisted, fundamentally, of feeding men into a music until the music got bored. I told the ones who would listen, slowly, over the years, a xenologist in a coffee shop in Geneva, a young pilot who reminded me of my brother in a bar on the orbital docks at Tanais after they re-terraformed it, a linguist at the University of New Cairo who had been trying for 30 years to translate the Asteros harmonics and who, when I told her what the prince had sung, sat very still for a long time and then asked me to repeat every detail. I do not know if anything I said made a difference. The war ended 6 years after I came off the Salt, and they tell me it ended because of a treaty, and the treaty came out of a series of negotiations conducted in a harmonic protocol that, the official histories say, was developed by a joint xenological team at New Cairo. I read the protocol when it was published. I do not understand most of it, but I recognized in the first line of it a fragment of the wrong old song. I do not know how it got there. The linguist I spoke to never wrote me back after our one meeting, and when I tried to find her again, 10 years later, she had retired and moved to a colony I could not afford to travel to. I would like to think she listened. I would like to think the prince's song made it into the treaty, the way a single grain of salt makes it into bread, and that the war ended because of it. I would like to think a great many things. At my age, you have to be careful with what you let yourself think, because at my age, the line between what is true and what you have needed to be true has gone soft. I am 81 years old as I write this. I live on a small farm on the recovered side of Tanais, not far from the place my mother died. I have a dog. I have a daughter who comes to see me when she can. I have my brother's medal in a drawer in the kitchen, next to a folded ration card with a sloppy drawing of a soldier on the back of it that I have kept for 60 years, and that I have never once shown to anybody, because some things are not for showing, they are only for keeping. I think about the prince every day, not as a grief. The grief went out of me a long time ago on the salt flats when he held my hand. I think about him the way a man thinks about a window he once looked through, and what he saw on the other side of the window, and how the window has been closed for a long time and is not going to open again in his lifetime, but how the looking changed him. He was not human, I'm sure of that. I'm not even sure he was a boy in the way I am a man, a body, a mind, a name. I think he was something older that had chosen to wear the shape of a boy because it was the shape that would let him do what he had come to do. I think he had been doing it for a very long time across many worlds, and that the worlds he visited each got a small piece of him, and that on Sahel IV he had perhaps given the last piece. I do not know. I am not a xenologist. I am a man who was shot down in a desert, and met something I cannot explain and walked out alive because of it. But I will tell you this. The Asteros, as a people, are not at war with us anymore. The colonies that were lost are being rebuilt. The harmonics that were broken 62 years ago have, according to the official histories, been retuned. There is even a Terran Asteros joint delegation now, on a world halfway between our space and theirs, and the delegation, I am told, opens every session with a passage of music that is not in any human or Asteros tradition. They call it the third song. They do not know where it comes from. They use it because both sides find that it settles the room. I know where it comes from. I do not say it out loud. He asked me to tell the ones who would listen, and the ones who will listen are not the people in delegations. They are the people who read things like this. They are the young pilots and the old farmers and the linguists and the bartenders and the daughters who come to see their fathers when they can. They are the ones who still, sometimes, hold another person in their minds hard enough to break a music. I am writing this for them. I am writing it because there was a boy in a pale gold uniform on a salt flat on the dead side of Sahel IV, 18 years into a war we should not have started and could not have ended without him, and he asked me to draw him a soldier, and I drew him my brother, and he kept the drawing in a pocket I could not quite see, and at the end of his travels he gave it back to me by saving my life. I do not know what he gave to the others. I do not know how many others there were. I hope there were many. I hope there are more still, walking the long places between worlds, asking small, impossible questions of the men they find broken in the dirt. Until then there is me, and there is this, and there is a folded ration card in a kitchen drawer on a quiet farm on Tanais. I am a tremendous old man. I live to find out. The prince was right. He was almost always right. He was, in the end, the kindest thing the universe ever sent into a war, and I was lucky enough to be the man on the salt when he came, and I have tried for 60 years to be worthy of that piece of luck. I do not know if I have been. I know that I tried. That is, I think, the most a man can say. I put down the stylus now. The sun is going down over the new orchards. My dog is asleep at my feet. My daughter is coming tomorrow. There is a wind in from the south that smells of pine resin, the way the foothills above our old colony used to smell, and the sky is the color of weak tea, and somewhere very far away, in a place I cannot see, a small boy in a pale gold uniform is going home. I hope he made it. I hope his flower was glad to see him. That is all.